That was a very different introduction to the one that I had last week when I was speaking to a bunch of executives with one of my other talks, which was called Finding My Virginity, which is a talk that I had for leaders. The MC got it wrong, and he said, "Welcome to the stage, Caroline Ravenall, who's going to be talking about losing her virginity." That would have been an interesting keynote. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is an adventure of a different kind. We've heard about technology ventures, we've heard about adventures onto mountains, and I'm going to talk to you about a business adventure, which took me from my home in the UK many years ago to head to the wilds of Africa to launch an airline for Richard Branson. Now, anybody who understands the aviation industry will know that starting an airline from a zero base in a new country is a task that normally takes an entire team of people 2 years to do. In this case, there were 2 of us, and we had less than 6 months. Now, that was situation normal at Virgin. Richard's philosophy has always been, if you're given an opportunity and you're not sure if you can do it, say yes anyway and figure it out as you go along. That's how I love to work. I joined the airline while it was still in its infancy and writing its policies on the back of fag packets. And I thrived in the maverick, non-bureaucratic culture that was known for its tongue-in-cheek publicity stunts, a bit like this one, particularly where it meant poking fun at Virgin's arch-rival British Airways. In case you don't recognise this is a picture courtesy of The Guardian. I think we probably all know that BA sponsored the London Eye, and when it came time to putting it up, they had problems with erection. And at the time, Virgin owned an airship and balloon company, and so this was the blimp, the guerrilla marketing kind of tactics that Virgin was really famous for. Now, Richard was really hands-on with the business at that time. He'd just sold Virgin Records. It shows how old I am. To fund the expansion of the airline. And so in my role then, weekly meetings with Richard were a regular occurrence. And my strive, drive, high achiever, anything is possible personality got me noticed as somebody who got results. And pretty soon I found myself on this rotating pool of senior managers that went around the world setting up and running airlines in different countries. I was your classic high achiever. I worked hard, I played hard. I was addicted to being busy and I was addicted to adventure. Anything less than 150% effort simply wasn't good enough. So it wasn't unusual to find me arriving early, leaving late, pulling all-nighters, working weekends, just so that I could stay ahead of my game. And when Virgin grew up enough to put performance management competencies in place, I was such a high achiever and such a fit with the culture that they moulded many of their competencies around me. Now, taking Virgin's brand and ethos into South Africa was a challenge. The culture wasn't quite as mature as that of the UK and the US, which is where I've been used to working. And it was certainly more conservative and very much more risk averse. It was also a time in global aviation history where airlines were slashing their distribution costs, which really impacted the way that travel agents who gave airlines 90% of their business were remunerated. So because of my international experience, I somehow ended up leading the charge in the country, which met with quite a lot of resistance, as you can imagine, both from outside and inside the airline, because, hey, none of us like change. I love this quote by Bruce Lee. When we're faced with a challenge, we don't rise to our level of expectation, we fall to our level of training. We all have our way of responding under pressure. Mine was to hunker down, focus on the goal, close off all the emotions that made me vulnerable, like anxiety and self-doubt, and lead the charge from the front. And when Richard declared this as one of the most successful launches in Virgin's history, and I began to get the reputation as a bit of a visionary kick-ass leader that was changing the way that airlines did business in the country, I pushed myself even harder. I thought everything was perfect until one day I had a complete meltdown in front of Richard and hundreds of high-profile guests at a launch event in Cape Town. It's actually quite funny now. I look back on it. Richard was making one of his daredevil entrances through the roof of a marquee on Camps Bay Beach that we set up for about 800 high-profile corporates and dignitaries from all over the world. I was supposed to be on stage, emceeing and facilitating the whole thing. I never made it to the stage because I was passing out in the background from stress and overwork. Now, I recognised the signs of what's known as stage 4 burnout long before I completely hit the wall, but I ignored them. Because I figured that when you're in a high-profile role for a brand like Virgin, the last thing you do is burn out. I survived on sleeping pills and caffeine. That was a mistake. So In this world that we're living in today, burnout is becoming somewhat of an epidemic. In a recent international survey, 72% of executives said that they were exhausted by the work that they did or the environment that they worked in. 67% of employees said the same thing. And that the cost of burnout in the States alone is something like $190 billion a year, and that is a conservative estimate. Just like the mythical hero Icarus, I was flying high on my wings of feathers and wax. I ignored the warnings, I flew too close to the sun, I crashed and burned on a spectacular scale, but the difference is I got up again. A lot of people don't. But here's the kicker. If you're a high achiever, if you're someone who's continually pushing the boundaries of what isn't and isn't possible and continually raising the bar, the myth of Icarus and the law of averages says that sometime you're going to fall. Sometime you're going to hit the wall. Burnout doesn't happen to average performers. It only really happens to high achievers. So if you've resonated with anything that I've said today, I think the first thing to do is pat yourself on the back, because the first thing to do is they should be giving us a medal for this. They know how hard I worked to kind of get here. I learned a lot from that experience. I learned about humility. I learned about failure. And I learned that sometimes you've got to be knocked down really, really hard before you can wake up and smell the coffee. The hardest lesson that I learned from that experience was the fact that there was nobody else to blame other than me. You always want someone to blame when you're going through something like that. Nobody else to blame other than me. You see, burnout doesn't happen overnight. It's the small stuff that we do every day, sometimes subconsciously for years, that becomes the big stuff, which is when all the wheels fall off. And we can end up going from hero to zero pretty much overnight. But the thing is, when burnout happens, you're not aware of all of that. Burnout, as well, doesn't have to be the end. I hear so many people talking these days where they say, oh, that's it, they've burnt out, that's the end of their career. It's not the end. Because I found ways to bring me back, to bounce back way better than I did before. Burnout is a wake-up call. It's an opportunity to recalibrate if we decide to take it. So being kind of like quite intense in my journey with Virgin, my recovery from burnout was intense as well. And it sent me on this journey into the fields of neuroscience and organizational behavior, philosophy, and functional and integrative medicine to find a way where I could bounce back, but also to become a more inspiring and authentic leader. And it's those things that I share in my masterclasses and my talks today. So where are you in all of this? On your tables, you'll have a piece of paper like this with like a little burnout curve on the back. And you're asked to plot where you think you might be in this whole process. If the stats are to be believed, 3 out of 5 people in this room will be on the right-hand side of the bell curve. Some of you will be pretty close to the bottom, which is pretty much where I was. Some people will be over there on the left-hand side of the bell curve. Some people there will be close to the bottom, and they're the ones that are wondering what the bloody hell I'm talking about because they think everything is cool. They're the ones that are on a very different planet to the rest of us. In this hysterically industrious world that we live in, ladies and gentlemen, a ticket to the game today requires that we show up, step up, and stand out way more than we've ever done. It's not enough to be an average performer. We've got to be overperforming in almost everything that we do. So if we want to keep pace, if we want to build inspiring organizations, we've got to recognize that when we get to the top of the mountain, we heard Lee's story about the mountain, it's not just enough to stick our flag in and put out our picnic blanket and think that this is the end, because what we see is a whole lot more of this. Stress isn't going away. I think stress reduction is actually an oxymoron. Stress is going to get worse before it gets better. So if we want to keep pace, if we want to lead outstanding organizations, and if we want to be a workaholic without completely hitting the wall, because that's really me. I love the work that I do, but how do we keep pace and how do we keep doing that? We've got to master the very delicate balance between standing out and burning out, and that in itself, I think, is a form of art. When the great sculptor Michelangelo was asked how he carved the statue of David, which stands in Florence, Italy, people were told, I took a great block of Carmelite marble, I saw the angel in the statue, and I carved away all the bits that didn't look like David. And I think that's pretty similar to us. We don't just suddenly shoot out the birth canal with these ideas about how to be a high achiever in a crazy world where the rug is continually being pulled from underneath us. We've got to kind of figure that out as we go along. Neuroscience tells us that the brain and the nervous system are plastic, which is a good thing. It's neuroplasticity that brings us to burnout. It's neuroplasticity that can take us back again. So I think this is really a form of what I think of as recalibrating as we go along. So I talk about in my talks and my keynotes about the dance of performance. And dance is an acronym that I use to dispel some of the deeply held beliefs about what it takes to be a high achiever in today's world, as well as what it means to be completely human. The D is about deciding who we want to be. The A is about atypical agility. One of the things I learned in my burnout journey was that burnout isn't just about avoiding burnout isn't just about eating 3 square meals a day, getting enough sleep and exercise. It's actually about what's going on the inside. And our capacity to be able to recover in the moment is the key to kind of keep us moving forward. The N stands for what I think of as naturally human. The body has an innate wisdom that we actually don't use. For example, do you know that 90% of serotonin, that feel-good hormone that we're always looking for to bring our mood up and to lift us, isn't produced in the brain, it's produced in the gut. So if we want to keep pace, we've got to stop thinking of our body as just another way to get our head to a meeting and start thinking of ourselves as complete biological systems. Change, courage, confidence. Every organisation wants this at the moment. And these are things that we need to master, particularly as a leader, if we want to be moving ahead into a future that is sometimes uncertain. Change, I learnt, isn't something that we do. Change is something that we are. Courage and confidence are not personality traits. They are skills, things that we can learn. And finally, effervescence and energy. How do we have the grit and the persistence to keep going, to keep climbing that mountain and down the other side and back up again, but in a way where we don't take ourselves so damn seriously? The art of staying ahead of the game is also the art of lightness and humour, I think, as well. Now, I don't have time to go into a lot of these in detail, but one thing that I would like to leave you with before I go on is this whole idea of deciding. I love this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. The person we are destined to become is the person that we decide to be. In this crazy world that we live in, most of our behaviour is reactive. Most of us don't think about how we're showing up in the world. So the first question I think to ask, one thing that I had to ask myself was, how am I showing up? Am I coming to work with passion and enthusiasm and aliveness, or am I dragging myself over the threshold, fueled by an ocean of anxiety and resentment and complete exhaustion? And this is a really important one for leaders, because energy is contagious. And how we show up depends on whether we bring our organisation to life or kill it. So how are you showing up? How are people experiencing you in the work that you're doing? The second thing that I'd like you to think about is, who do you want to be in the process? So many of us think about what we want to achieve. The big house, the corner office, the holiday home in Benidorm or South Africa or wherever it is. But we don't think about who we want to be in the process. What are the qualities we want to bring to our leadership? Because this just doesn't happen by accident. It's a conscious decision. It's a conscious choice. And that decision will also be fueled by your why. We've heard this a lot from speakers today. What is it that gets you out of bed every day? What is your why for doing what you're doing? This was a big question for me. People think working with Richard Branson and Virgin is one of the most amazing things that you could do. And I really did have a wonderful career. I can't knock that. But when you take away the brand, when you take away the celebrity CEO, Running an airline is about getting a 450-ton metal tube in the air every single day, and that was something that didn't inspire me anymore. I had to be really honest about that. So what I want you to think about as I leave the stage today is, how are you showing up? Who do you want to be in the process, and why are you doing this? Ladies and gentlemen, in this crazy world that we live in today, these things are a choice. And that's the choice that we make between standing out or burning out. My name is Caroline Ravenall. Thank you very much.